Hello, welcome to Do It Yourself with Wayne. Today we're here in our kitchen and we're going to be planting our tomato seeds. And basically we've got a bunch of different things out here on the counter. We're going to talk about all of them, particularly the different containers that we have started seeds in over the years. We're going to talk about each different type of container and why we like them, why we don't like them, how they worked, how they didn't work. We've got different kinds of labels. We're going to talk about those. And we've got 4 different varieties of tomatoes. 3 of them are favorites that we nearly always plant. And we've got a new variety. Now, one of the great things about starting your own tomato plants is there are so many varieties of tomato plants to choose from. And different tomatoes are better for certain things. Like your big boys, better boys, things like that are better for slicing, for making that bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. Your Romas are better for tomato sauces, things like that. But anyway, we've got 3 that we like, that we nearly always plant. We've got a new variety. And also, when you start picking your tomato seeds, do you know the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomato plants? It might make a difference of what variety you choose. We'll be talking about that as well. So let's move forward and getting these tomato seeds planted in some soil and getting them started. First, we're going to talk about the seed varieties that we're planting today. First one is Better Boy. I think I mentioned earlier, that's just a really good slicing tomato for sandwiches and things of that nature. The next we have is 4th of July. Now, I started planting the 4th of July tomatoes probably 8 or 10 years ago, and I was impressed with the long season. The tomatoes don't get particularly large. Maybe if you get one the size of a baseball, that's a big one. But they have a good flavor, and the plants tend to produce for a long season. I've also noticed that when I bring those in the house, they seem to last longer before they go bad. So that's another plus for the 4th of July tomatoes. And then we've got the Cherokee Purple, which is an heirloom type tomato. They have a little bit of a purplish tint to it. Some people don't care for that, but they have a good flavor. So that's the 3rd of the 3 that we generally always plant. And then I got these from Haas Seeds. Haas, I guess it's actually Haas Tools, but they do some seeds. This is the Haasinator. It's their name, not mine. But anyway, that's one we've never planted before, so we're going to plant those this year and see how they go. So anyway, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of different tomatoes have different attributes. Sometimes we plant the small salad type tomatoes. Sometimes we don't. We don't have any of those this year. We may pick up some a little bit later, but we don't have any right now. There's also white tomatoes. There's yellow tomatoes. So that's one of the great things about starting from seeds is there's so much variety to choose from. All right, now let's move on to talking about the different pots that we're going to use. Now, one thing we forgot to mention earlier, I apologize for that, but when we were putting our video together, we noticed, that's why you're seeing some finished product here in the middle of the video, but we forgot to tell you about the difference between determinate and indeterminate tomato plants. Basically, indeterminate means they have a longer season for bearing fruit. That's indeterminate. Now, determinate, basically those plants have all their fruit at about the same time. So if you wanted to do where you can a lot of tomatoes and you want to can them all at one time, be done with it, get determinate varieties because they will produce a lot of fruit at one time and then they're done. If you want something like the 4th of July, which is indeterminate, they will produce for a longer season. They don't produce as many at a time, but they produce for a longer season. So think about that when you're choosing your tomato varieties. Determinate or indeterminate? Do you want a short period of production or do you want a longer season of producing fruit? Now for the different containers that you can start your plants in. I've been planting my own garden and growing stuff for probably 50 years or more. And it's almost an unending list of different types of containers I've started seeds in. But tomato seeds, it's best if you start them in something before they get transplanted to the garden. But some of the more popular things, we get flowers throughout the year sometimes in these things. They work okay. I've used just pots like this. I've bought a bunch of these over the years, and they work pretty good. These little Jiffy pellet pot thing or pellets things, I don't like those. You buy them, they look like that. Now this one has been soaking for a while. They get like this. You put yours, got a little dip or a little impression right there. You put your seed in. They're good for starting your seeds, but I don't particularly like them. But if you do use these things, there's a little bit of a mesh on the outside. Make sure you take that mesh off before you plant your plant, or at the very least, cut it so the roots can get out of this little bag. Because I have had tomato plants that when I pulled them up in the fall, most of the roots are still contained within this little mesh bag. So if you do use the little pellet things like that, make sure you do something about that mesh bag. I've used the little peat cups that are popular. They work pretty good, but here again, make sure you break the cup a little bit before you plant them in the garden. They tend to dry out real quick. I don't like that so much. But I've also used these things. These are good if you plan to spend a lot of time transplanting your seeds, because if you put seeds in here, as soon as that thing comes up and it's got a leaf or two on it, you got to get them out of there because the roots don't have anywhere to go. So if you do want, something like this with the real small holes, make sure that you understand that they ain't gonna stay here very long. You got to be transplanted into a larger container, something like one of these maybe, but they can't stay in there long. It's got to be a real short-term thing. I have used this. Don't plan to use it in the future, but it can be used. But you just got to change them often. My favorite container is this right here. It's a red plastic drink cup. I cut a few holes in the bottom. Sometimes I use a soldering iron and just melt them. You can take a knife and just make a little hole, a couple of holes in the bottom just for drainage. The thing I like about these, they're relatively inexpensive. They're durable. And particularly for tomatoes. Tomatoes have roots that go deep. And if you fill this up with dirt, it's what we'll be doing here in a little bit, there's a lot of depth here for the tomatoes roots or the tomato plant's roots to go down. And when you're ready to plant it in the garden, you just put your fingers across there with a plant coming up between your fingers, turn it upside down, and it'll slide out real easily without disturbing the roots much. So it doesn't stress the plant nearly as much as trying to get it out of some of these other containers. So this is the type of container we'll be using today because it is my favorite. It is what has worked best for me. All right, now let's move on to other things. Now that we've chosen the containers that we're going to start our seeds in, this is another cup. We're not using this one today, but always put holes in the bottom of these cups. If you don't, your seeds will likely get too wet and they'll rot and die. Okay, you got to put holes in. We've used a knife to put little holes here. We've used soldering iron just to melt the little holes. That works really well. But if you use a soldering iron, just remember the fumes that comes off that melting plastic is somewhat toxic. It's much better if you do that outside or at the very least in a well-ventilated area. So the next thing we do is we took all of our cups and we labeled them. That one's not labeled. Like this one, took a Sharpie on the side of the cup, it says Better Boy. So we know we've got Better Boy seeds planted in this cup. And we have found that over the years, that is a very durable way to label them. We use these cups year after year a lot of times, and sometimes we don't even have to rewrite the label if we're planting that same variety again in that cup because it stays on there that well. Now if you need another type of label, we've used these little white ones. I find these to work rather well. If you need these, I'll put a link in the description to a link to Amazon where you can purchase these if you want to. We've also used old popsicle sticks. Just write on them with a Sharpie and it works pretty well too. All right, now the next thing we did is we filled all of our cups with garden soil, potting mix. Now over the years, I've used potting mix, I've used seed starting mix, I've used compost, whether it be store-bought or compost that we created. I've used just soil out of my garden before, and they all work. But I think the potting mix works as good as anything. And so that's what we typically use for starting our tomatoes, and it works very well. Now I'm just going to do this row here. These are our Cherokee Purples. These are 4th of July. These are Better Boys. These are 4th of July, and those are the Hassanators. I'm just going to do this one row in the interest of saving time, but they'll all be planted the same. So I got my seed pack open. I'll shake a few out here in my hand. I only need 5 seeds. And a lot of people tell you to put more than 1 seed in each container. I generally put 1, maybe 2 in there. But I never put more than 2 seeds in a container because usually our germination rate is really good. So 1 seed in each container is usually good enough. I think I got 2 in here and 2 in here, and those 3 got 1 apiece in it. But that's all I'm going to do, because like I said, our germination rate's generally really good. I'm going to take and push those down just a little bit, maybe 1/4 of an inch or so. Not any more than that, and then push a little bit of dirt over the tops of them. You don't want them buried deep, you just want them just enough that the tops of them stays damp. Press it down just a little bit maybe. Don't press it down much, just enough to get the soil in good contact with the seed. That's what you're really wanting. And then I water the tops of them. And we just made this little squirter thing here out of an old drink bottle, and just water the tops of them good. And that'll get them started. Now, after we finish the rest of them, I got a pitcher of water. I'll pour that water in here. That's why we have this large tub. Now, for the short term, while these are in my house, which will probably, might be a week, maybe less, maybe a little more, I'm not sure at this point. But I want to make sure that the water stays in the bottom of this container. So all these cups are sitting in water, but I don't want the water really deep. 1/4 of an inch maybe is plenty, but that will make sure that they stay damp enough that they will germinate and grow. And basically that's how we get started here. And as I think I said before, once they get up to about 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches tall, we'll be moving them outdoors into our cold frame, because it's still too cold to put them in our garden. We're about 4 weeks away from our last frost. I could have gotten these started a little bit sooner, but 4 weeks from the last frost is early enough to get started. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do this to the rest of them, water in the bottom, just leave them sitting here in the house until they germinate for outside. So that's it for starting our tomato seeds indoors. And we'd just like to say thank you for visiting Do It Yourself with Wayne, and we hope you have a great gardening season.